When you look at someone you've built a life with, you don't imagine that behind the soft smiles, the ordinary days, and the quiet routines, there might be an entirely different world they've hidden away. You imagine that the person who sits across the table from you at breakfast is living the same story you are, that the promises once exchanged in whispers and vows are still being honored, even in the dullest moments of everyday life. That was what Amelia believed about her husband, Daniel. To her, their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was steady. They had been together for almost 15 years, and in that time, they had gone through the usual stages of married life. First, the excitement, then the adjustments, the compromises, and finally, what felt like a comfortable rhythm. Amelia was the kind of woman who paid attention to the small things. She wasn't flashy or loud. She never needed to be the center of attention. She worked quietly, kept her home warm, and always made sure that Daniel had support in the background of his life. She wasn't blind to flaws, of course. She knew Daniel had his moments of selfishness, times when he was too focused on work, or too careless with words. But she had always written those off as normal imperfections. After all, she wasn't perfect either. What she didn't know, and what she could never have imagined, was that for years, Daniel had been living a double life. Not just an affair, something Amelia might have understood as a foolish mistake, but something far larger, far deeper, and far more deliberate. He had another home, another woman, and children. A whole second family, hidden carefully behind the curtain of excuses and business trips and late nights at the office. The first clue came to Amelia not as a sudden explosion, but as something small and almost forgettable. One afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Normally, Amelia never checked his messages. She wasn't the kind of wife who snooped. Trust had always been a given in her mind, but the preview of the text caught her eye. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even suspicious on the surface. It was a child's message. The word said, "Daddy, are you coming to the game tomorrow?" She froze. Their son was grown, already in college, and certainly not calling Daniel Daddy anymore. Amelia stared at the screen, her heart slowing as her mind scrambled to find an explanation. Perhaps it was a wrong number. Perhaps someone's child had typed it by mistake. But then the phone buzzed again. This time the message read, "Mom says we should save you a seat in the front row." Amelia put the phone down. She didn't touch it, didn't reply, didn't even scroll. Her hands felt oddly cold, as if all the warmth had drained out of her. She went about the rest of the evening quietly, waiting for Daniel to come out of the shower, waiting for him to say something that might explain the messages. But he said nothing. He came out humming, kissed her on the cheek absent-mindedly, and carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. Amelia lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The messages repeated in her head, word for word. She wanted to shake Daniel awake and demand the truth, but something inside her stopped her. She told herself she needed to be certain before she spoke, because if she accused him and she was wrong, the damage could be permanent. That was the moment when her calmness became her shield. Instead of reacting in anger, she chose silence. She chose to watch. The following weeks turned Amelia into an investigator, though she never once let it show. She smiled when Daniel walked through the door. She prepared his meals. She asked the same small questions she always had. How was work? Did you eat lunch today? But behind that calmness, she observed. She noticed the nights when Daniel claimed to be traveling for business. She checked the bank statements more carefully and saw money being withdrawn in cash, large sums that didn't add up to their household needs. She noticed small details on his clothes. A child's sticker stuck to the inside of his coat one evening, a faint smell of baby lotion clinging to his shirt on another. The truth was revealing itself slowly, piece by piece, like an unwanted puzzle she could no longer avoid solving. One Saturday, When Daniel said he had a conference out of town, Amelia followed him. She wasn't reckless about it. She drove separately, leaving the house long after he did, keeping her distance, her hand steady on the wheel. She felt as though she were watching a stranger play the role of her husband. Daniel drove not to a hotel, not to an office, but to a modest little house on the edge of another neighborhood. He parked his car in the driveway and walked up the steps with an ease that told Amelia this wasn't a secret visit. It was a return home. She sat in her car, parked far enough away not to be noticed, and she watched. A woman came to the door, smiling brightly as though she'd been waiting for him. 2 children ran out to greet him, one of them leaping into his arms, calling out, "Daddy!" The word hit Amelia like a stone. She sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Time seemed to stretch as she sat there, hidden, watching the life her husband had built without her knowledge. He stayed inside for hours. When he finally came out, his hair was tousled, his shirt slightly wrinkled, the easy smile of a man who belonged. He kissed the woman on the cheek before leaving, and Amelia knew then that there was no mistake. No misunderstanding. No innocent explanation. The drive home that night felt endless. She didn't cry. Not then. She was too stunned for tears. Her mind replayed the image of the children, their small arms wrapped around him, their voices full of love. She thought about the years she had spent believing they were partners, that they were a family in the truest sense. All the while, he had been splitting himself between 2 lives, lying to both. And yet, when Daniel walked back into their home later that evening, Amelia greeted him with the same calm voice she always used. She asked if he was hungry. She placed food in front of him. She listened to him talk about his so-called conference, nodding in all the right places. He didn't notice the difference in her. He didn't notice that while he ate, she was memorizing every detail of his lies, storing them quietly like a ledger in her mind. It was in that calmness that her revenge began to take shape. Not in shouting, not in dramatic confrontations, but in silence. Amelia understood that anger would only give him power. If she screamed, he could dismiss her as emotional. If she begged, he could pity her. But if she stayed quiet, observant, patient, she could choose the perfect moment to act. And when she did, he would never see it coming. But first, she needed to know everything. One truth wasn't enough. She wanted the full picture of what Daniel had been doing, how long it had been going on, and who exactly this other woman was. Only then could she begin to decide what to do about it. And so, for weeks that turned into months, Amelia became the quiet architect of her own plan. She gathered details slowly, like threads she would one day weave into a net strong enough to catch him. She learned the woman's name through a piece of mail she saw Daniel carelessly leave in his car. She discovered the ages of the children by overhearing snippets of conversation Daniel let slip on the phone when he thought she wasn't listening. She even learned that the woman, her rival, though Amelia didn't see her that way yet, believed Daniel was fully committed to her, that he was a man who had chosen her wholeheartedly. That was what struck Amelia most, the depth of his deceit. He hadn't just lied to her. He had lied to both women, building walls of dishonesty around them, and keeping each life separate, as though he were a man entitled to 2 realities. Amelia's silence was not weakness. It was preparation. Every time Daniel kissed her on the cheek, every time he came home late with a story rehearsed too smoothly, she smiled gently and said nothing. Inside, though, she was sharpening her knowledge, holding it like a blade she would one day use, not to lash out in the heat of the sound moment, but to deliver a precise, undeniable strike that would unravel everything he thought he had built. Amelia had always thought of herself as someone steady, almost invisible in the best sense. She was never the loudest person in the room, nor the kind to draw attention. But in the weeks after discovering Daniel's secret life, she found a new strength in that quietness. It gave her cover. It allowed her to move unnoticed, collecting details, storing truths that Daniel never realized she held. She began with small, cautious steps. The woman Daniel had built his second life with was named Claire. Amelia learned this after spotting a folded envelope tucked between the seats of Daniel's car. It was nothing dramatic, just a letter from the children's school addressed to Claire Johnson. At first, Amelia hesitated to touch it, her hands trembling as she slid it back exactly where she had found it, careful not to leave a trace. But the name stayed with her, etched into her memory. From there, Amelia used the smallest of opportunities to piece together the picture. She searched Claire Johnson quietly, first on the school's website, then in community directories. She found out Claire was a nurse, someone who worked long shifts at a nearby hospital. She saw photos of her online. Nothing scandalous, nothing glamorous. Just an ordinary woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't a seductress. She was simply someone who believed she too had a family. That realization unsettled Amelia more than anything. She wanted to hate Claire, to direct all her anger toward her. But the more she learned, the more she saw Claire as another victim. She seemed unaware of Amelia's existence, just as Amelia had been unaware of hers. It was Daniel who had orchestrated the entire charade, moving between two lives like an actor playing different roles on separate stages. Amelia began to follow a quiet routine. When Daniel claimed he was working late or traveling, she tracked his movements. Sometimes she followed him in her car, always at a distance, always cautious. Other times she stayed home but checked his credit card statements, noticing charges for groceries at stores they never used or gifts she never received. He was careful, yes, but not careful enough to hide from someone who had now learned to look. Each discovery added weight to Amelia's silence. She felt it pressing against her chest at night when she lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. She wondered how many times he had lain like this after returning from Claire's house. She wondered what stories he told Claire about her, if he spoke of her at all. Was she just an inconvenience to him? An obligation he had to maintain so he wouldn't look like a deserter? One evening, Amelia decided to test him. Daniel had just returned from one of his supposed business trips. He looked tired, but it wasn't the exhaustion of corporate meetings. It was the kind of weariness that came from being stretched between two homes. She placed dinner in front of him as usual, keeping her voice calm. "How was the trip?" she asked, watching him closely. He smiled, rubbing his forehead. "Busy, long meetings, you know how it is." Amelia nodded, stirring her soup slowly. "Anyone interesting there? Did you see anyone from out of town?" Daniel hesitated just briefly. Half a second, a pause so small that most people wouldn't notice. But Amelia noticed. She had trained herself to catch every flicker of discomfort. "No," he said lightly, "just the usual crowd." She smiled and dropped the subject, but inside, she marked it down. That tiny hesitation was confirmation. He was juggling lies, and even the smallest slip could expose him. Amelia began keeping a journal, hidden carefully where Daniel would never look. In it, she recorded dates, times, places, and details. She wasn't sure yet what she would do with it, but the act of writing gave her control. Each entry felt like a step toward reclaiming the power he had taken from her. The idea of revenge grew slowly, not like a spark, but like a steady flame. She didn't want to scream at him or throw him out of the house immediately. That would be too easy for him. He could spin a story, frame her as hysterical, and walk away to his other life without consequence. No, Amelia wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. She wanted to dismantle his lies in a way that left no escape, no safe place to run. Her first thought was to confront Claire, to walk up to her door, introduce herself, and shatter the illusion Daniel had built. But the more she considered it, the more she realized that such an approach might backfire. If Claire reacted with anger or disbelief, Daniel could twist the situation, paint Amelia as unstable. And Amelia didn't want Claire's sympathy or anger. She wanted strategy. So instead, Amelia decided to wait and keep watching. She noticed patterns. Daniel spent every other weekend with Claire, claiming work travel. He sometimes slipped out on weekday evenings, telling Amelia he had late meetings. Claire's children, Amelia realized, were around 7 and 9, young enough to still see their father as a hero, too young to question his divided loyalties. Amelia thought about her own son, away at college, almost an adult now. She remembered the years she had raised him largely on her own while Daniel focused on his career. At the time, she told herself Daniel was working hard for the family's future. But now she saw the truth. Much of that time had been spent building another family altogether. The betrayal stung in ways she couldn't fully describe. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the years of stolen time, the stolen trust, the stolen love that she had given freely while he gave pieces of himself elsewhere. But Amelia didn't let the pain show. If anything, she became more patient, more composed. Daniel began to think that he had the perfect setup, that his lies were safe. That confidence would be his undoing. One night, while Daniel was away, Amelia decided to see Claire's home up close. She drove to the small house again, parking at a distance. She sat quietly, watching the lights inside. Through the window, she saw Daniel sitting on the couch, a child nestled against him, Claire beside them. They looked like a picture of happiness, a family at ease. Amelia felt a strange detachment as she watched. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry in that moment. She was simply observing, memorizing every detail. The color of the curtains, the way the children leaned on him, the soft laugh of the woman who believed she was his only partner. She stayed for an hour before leaving, driving home to the quiet emptiness of her own house. She sat in her living room, staring at the framed family photographs on the wall. Pictures of herself, Daniel, and their son on vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings. She realized now that half those smiles were borrowed, shared with someone else in spirit even if not in body. That night, she made herself a promise. She wouldn't just survive this betrayal. She wouldn't let Daniel continue to live comfortably, between two lives. She would dismantle the web he had spun, but she would do it carefully, with precision, so that when the truth came crashing down, it would be undeniable. Her revenge would not be loud. It would not be messy. It would be deliberate, calculated, and final. And so, Amelia began to prepare not just by watching, but by planning. She started by making copies of financial documents, ensuring she had proof of every hidden withdrawal, every suspicious expense. She quietly consulted a lawyer, not to act immediately but to understand her options. She asked careful, neutral questions, presenting herself as someone merely curious about legal protections in case of a separation. The lawyer gave her insights into property rights, custody, and the division of assets. Amelia took notes, asking nothing that would betray her situation directly. When she left the office, she felt more grounded. Knowledge was power, and power was something Daniel never expected her to claim. At home, she began to set aside small amounts of money, hidden away from their joint accounts. Not because she was planning to leave suddenly, but because she wanted security. She wanted to know that when the time came, she could act without hesitation. Daniel, meanwhile, remained oblivious. He carried on with his routine, still splitting his time, still telling his practiced lies. If anything, he seemed more relaxed, more confident that his life was under control. Amelia smiled at him, kissed him goodnight, and let him believe it. The calmness that once made her invisible was now her greatest weapon. She was building something in silence. A plan, a strategy. a slow unraveling that would one day leave Daniel with nothing but the wreckage of his own lies. Amelia's quiet patience was not without its cost. Holding so much knowledge inside her, carrying it day after day, was like holding a stone in her chest. It never went away. She could feel it pressing against her, heavy and unyielding, even in the most ordinary moments. But she had made a decision, and decisions like hers demanded endurance. Her plan could not be rushed. She understood this more clearly than ever. Daniel had spent years building his false life. If she wanted to undo it properly, she had to match that patience with her own. Each day, she reminded herself that silence was not weakness, it was her strategy. Daniel still played his roles as though nothing was wrong. At home, he was the affectionate husband, sometimes distracted, sometimes careless, but always presenting himself as a man grounded in family life. At Claire's house, he was the doting father, the loving partner, the man who laughed freely, with 2 young children. Amelia could picture it all, even when she didn't see it with her own eyes. She knew his patterns now as well as she knew the rhythm of her own breath. She decided her first step would not be to expose him, but to prepare herself, to build her own foundation so strong that when the storm finally came, she would stand untouched, while Daniel was stripped bare. That meant gathering evidence, not just for her own satisfaction, but for when the time came to act. She began with finances. Quietly, carefully, she photographed every statement, every receipt that looked unusual. She noticed gifts purchased but never received, hotel bookings that never involved her, cash withdrawals that lined up neatly with his supposed business trips. She created folders on a private drive, labeled and organized with dates. The calmness with which she did this startled even her. She felt like an accountant, tallying up a debt that would one day come due. Her journal became thicker with entries. She wrote everything. The time he left, the time he returned, the excuses he used, even the tone of his voice when he lied. The details felt small in the moment, but she knew that in the larger picture they were powerful. Lies unravel quickest when there is proof of their contradictions. The next step was information about Claire. Not to harm her. Amelia had long since decided that Claire was not her enemy, but to understand how much Daniel had promised her. Through quiet observation and occasional research, Amelia learned that Claire believed Daniel was separated from his wife. It was the story he told to explain his absences, that the divorce was nearly final, that he was only staying in his current home for financial and practical reasons until everything was settled. Amelia almost laughed when she discovered this. He hadn't just hidden a family from her. He had erased her entirely from his other life. In Claire's world, Amelia was nothing but a name on papers, a ghost of a past marriage, a loose end Daniel claimed he was about to tie up. That lie was important. It gave Amelia her angle. She realized that one day, when the truth was revealed, Daniel would not only lose her, but also the trust of Claire, who had been living in the comfort of false promises. Still, Amelia did not act. She held back, waiting, watching. She let Daniel grow more comfortable in his deceit. If he suspected her silence, he never showed it. He was so accustomed to her calmness that he mistook it for ignorance. He didn't see the watchful intelligence behind her soft eyes. He didn't know that every smile she gave him was another stitch in the net she was weaving. Then came the evening that shifted Amelia's patience into sharper focus. Daniel was preparing for another weekend away, claiming he had to attend a company retreat. He packed his bags quickly, almost carelessly, while Amelia folded his shirts with her usual precision. As he zipped the suitcase, she looked at him and said, "You'll be gone all weekend then?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Workshops, meetings, all of it. I won't be back until late Sunday." She smiled softly and nodded. "I'll miss you." He leaned down, kissed her cheek, and walked out with his suitcase, not once questioning the sincerity of her words. That weekend, Amelia didn't follow him. She didn't need to. She knew exactly where he was and exactly what he was doing. Instead, she did something far more deliberate. She went to visit her son at college. She spent time with him, listened to his stories, and let him talk about his classes, his friends, his plans. She felt a bittersweet comfort in those hours. He was almost grown now, old enough to see through lies, old enough to know his father's absence for what it truly was. But Amelia didn't tell him. Not yet. Protecting him from the storm, at least for now, was part of her plan. When the truth came, she wanted it to be undeniable. She wanted her son to see not just betrayal, but the strength of how she had handled it. On Sunday evening, when Daniel returned, Amelia greeted him with the same quiet warmth she always did. She asked about his retreat. He gave her stories, fabricated with the ease of practice. She nodded and listened, hiding her knowledge behind calm eyes. It was then that Amelia realized something. Her power wasn't just in what she knew. It was in what he didn't know she knew. He was standing on a cliff's edge, thinking he was on solid ground. And she was the only one aware of how close he was to the fall. The weeks that followed were filled with small tests. Amelia began, planting questions casually, small remarks that forced Daniel to invent new details. She would ask about colleagues he claimed to be with, events he said he attended, minor names and dates. Each time she wrote down his answers, waiting for the inevitable contradictions. And they came. Not all at once, but in small slips. A dinner he claimed to have attended was supposedly on a Wednesday, yet later he mentioned it as Thursday. A name he gave for a colleague turned out not to exist. Tiny cracks in the surface of his lies. Amelia wrote them all down. Her revenge plan was not a single strike. It was a dismantling. She wanted Daniel's world to collapse, not from her accusations alone, but from the undeniable evidence of his own actions. One evening, as she sat quietly at her desk, looking over the notes and documents she had collected, she felt an odd sense of calm. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was a certainty. She was no longer the wife who believed blindly. She was no longer the woman who gave trust freely without question. She had become something else, deliberate, thoughtful, patient. She thought back to the moment she first read that text message, the child calling Daniel Daddy. That small message had been the spark. Now she had an entire fire built, waiting for the moment to let it burn. But she also knew timing mattered. Too soon, and Daniel could recover. Too late, and the damage might reach her son. She needed the perfect moment, one that would expose him fully, leaving no room for denial. And so, she waited still. She prepared herself like someone sharpening tools for a task not yet begun. Each day, she lived her life as usual, cooking meals, keeping the home, speaking to neighbors with her gentle smile. To anyone looking in, she was simply Amelia, the quiet, steady wife. Only she knew that beneath that calm surface, a storm was gathering. The perfect payback was not ready yet, but Amelia could feel it coming closer. She could sense the pieces falling into place. Daniel's lies were growing heavier, harder for him to balance. His confidence was becoming carelessness. And when the moment came, Amelia would be ready. Amelia often thought of her silence as a kind of rehearsal. Every evening when Daniel walked through the door, kissed her cheek, and spoke his practiced words, she played her part too. She matched his calm tone, she asked her gentle questions, and she tucked away every detail he offered. On the surface, she looked like the same woman she had always been. But inside, she was no longer the trusting wife. She was the quiet observer, the archivist of lies, the patient strategist. Her evidence had grown thick, Files, photographs, journal entries, financial records. She had enough now to prove what Daniel was doing beyond any doubt. But Amelia wasn't just collecting facts to throw at him in anger. She wanted his world to collapse around him in a way that would leave him with nothing to cling to. She wanted him to feel, at least for a time, the emptiness she had felt when she first discovered his secret family. She began to take small, deliberate steps to prepare the stage. None of them were dramatic. None of them revealed her hand. They were quiet actions, each one disguised as ordinary life. She spoke with her lawyer again, asking for clarification about separation and divorce laws. She asked about property rights, about the house, about what financial arrangements would look like. She asked about infidelity, not in a confrontational way, but as though she were simply curious about how courts handled such matters. The lawyer didn't know the depth of Amelia's situation, but she gave her clear answers, and Amelia left, the office more certain than ever of her path. At home, Amelia began making quiet changes. She transferred small sums of money into a private account, always under the guise of household expenses. She secured copies of her important documents, stashing them in a place Daniel would never think to look. She checked their joint assets carefully, making sure she knew where every dollar sat, where every investment lay. Knowledge was security, and Amelia wanted security before she took the next step. Still, Daniel remained oblivious. He continued, his double life with an almost careless confidence. If anything, he had grown more relaxed. Perhaps her calmness reassured him, convincing him she was still the same wife who never questioned. He seemed to believe that the lies he spun so easily were enough to cover him forever. But Amelia saw the cracks forming. He came home one night with a small bruise on his wrist, and when she asked where it came from, he hesitated. He said he had bumped into a door at work, but his tone was too quick, too practiced. Another night, he slipped and mentioned an event last weekend that contradicted the story he had told her about being away on business. These weren't accidents. They were signs of a man carrying too many stories, too many roles, unable to keep them perfectly aligned. Amelia noted it all, calmly, patiently, quietly, and then she began to act, not directly, but indirectly. She started asking questions that seemed harmless, but were designed to test him. Over dinner, she would ask about a colleague from his supposed business trip. What was her name again? She'd ask casually, as though she'd forgotten he would answer, sometimes inventing new names, sometimes stumbling slightly before recovering. Each time, Amelia smiled, nodded, and tucked the contradiction away. She also began to build connections beyond him. She reached out more often to her son at college, strengthening that bond. She reconnected with old friends, people she had let drift over the years while she focused on Daniel's career and their household. She didn't tell them what she was going through, but she let those relationships grow again, quietly giving herself a support system that would one day matter. Her revenge plan was never about sudden exposure. It was about leaving Daniel without escape, and part of that meant ensuring that when the truth came out, she would be surrounded by people who believed her, people who saw her as steady and reliable. She wanted him isolated, while she stood strong. One turning point came when Amelia decided to attend a community fundraiser that Daniel had claimed he couldn't join because of work. She went alone, walking into the hall with her calm presence, her soft smile. And there, in the middle of conversation, she overheard two people talking casually about Claire. They didn't mention her as a stranger. They mentioned her as someone well known in her neighborhood, someone who was seen often with Daniel. Amelia didn't interrupt. She didn't let a flicker of emotion cross her face. But inside, she felt something shift. Daniel wasn't just lying to her. He was lying in ways that were becoming visible to others. His careful balancing act wasn't as invisible as he thought. She left the fundraiser early, returning home to sit quietly in the living room. She stared at the family photographs on the wall again, the smiling faces frozen in time. She realized then that her revenge wasn't only about punishing Daniel. It was about reclaiming her own story. She didn't want to live as a side character in his double life. She wanted to step out of the shadow he had created and let him fall in it instead. The first direct action she took against him was subtle. She made a phone call, not to Daniel, not to Claire, but to the school where Claire's children were enrolled. She asked a simple question, posing as a relative who needed clarification about an event. From the polite voice on the other end, Amelia confirmed what she already suspected. Daniel was listed as the children's father. Not just in secret, not just in spirit, officially on paperwork. That confirmation hardened her resolve. This wasn't just an affair. It was a deliberate second life, woven into legal documents, built into institutions. He had gone so far as to anchor his lies in places that couldn't be erased with a simple apology. Amelia sat at her desk that night, looking at her growing collection of evidence. She had the financial records. She had the contradictions. Now she had confirmation of his second family, documented and official. She knew she could expose him at any moment, but she held back still, because timing was everything. She began imagining the scene she wanted. Not a fight in their kitchen, not a tearful argument. She wanted Daniel surrounded by undeniable truth, stripped of his ability to twist or talk his way out. She wanted him caught in his own web with no room to maneuver. And so, she planned carefully. She thought about occasions where both families might collide, moments where the exposure would be natural, not forced. She thought about the children, about how to protect them from the worst of the fallout. She thought about her son, about how to reveal the truth in a way that would protect his respect for her, while showing him his father's betrayal without doubt. Every detail mattered. She rehearsed conversations in her head, not to deliver them, yet, but to prepare. She thought about her tone, her words, her presence. She didn't want to scream or cry. She wanted to be the calm voice of truth, the one holding the evidence, the one who stood steady while Daniel's world crumbled. Her patience was long, but her plan was beginning to sharpen. She had moved beyond observation now. She was setting the stage, piece by piece, so that when the curtain finally lifted, the performance would be one Daniel could never forget. For now, Amelia kept her secret close. She smiled at her husband when he walked through the door. She kissed his cheek goodnight. She let him believe in his false sense of security. But inside, she knew the moment was drawing near. The day Amelia had been waiting for did not arrive suddenly. It wasn't a dramatic lightning strike or a loud confrontation. Instead, it crept into her life quietly, like the slow unfurling of a storm she had seen gathering on the horizon for months. She had prepared for it carefully, step by step, and when the moment finally came, she was ready. Her plan had taken shape in her mind with precision. She didn't want shouting matches or tears. She didn't want a dramatic scene in their kitchen, where Daniel could twist her emotions, raise his voice, or attempt to pacify her with half-truths. She wanted clarity, exposure, and the kind of silence that followed undeniable truth. She wanted Daniel caught in a place where every mask he wore would fall at once. That opportunity came through something almost ordinary. Their son, Ethan, was returning home from college for a short break. Amelia knew Daniel would try to split his time between his two families, as he always did. But this time, she made sure to set the stage differently. She suggested a family dinner. Something simple. Something warm. She mentioned that Ethan would like to see his father. Daniel, unsuspecting, agreed. But Amelia had already taken the next step. Quietly, discreetly, she reached out to Claire. It wasn't an easy message to compose. Her hand shook as she typed the words, but her calmness guided her. She introduced herself simply as Daniel's wife. She didn't accuse, didn't lash out. She wrote with a measured tone, "I thought you should know the truth." Daniel has not been separated. He has been living a double life. I think it's time you saw it for yourself. If you'd like, come by our home this weekend, around dinner time. Bring the children if you wish. You deserve to see the truth with your own eyes." She sent the message and waited. For hours, there was no reply. But later that night, a single line came back from Claire. "I'll be there." Amelia read those words in silence, her heart steady. She wasn't angry at Claire. She knew what this would mean for her too. But the truth had to be shared. Daniel's walls of lies were about to collapse from both sides at once. On the evening of the dinner, Amelia prepared the table with her usual care. She laid out plates, poured water into glasses, and set out the food she had cooked. Ethan was upstairs, unpacking his things, humming softly as he settled back into his old room. Daniel arrived home in high spirits, greeting his son with a wide smile, pulling him into a hug. Amelia watched them quietly, her face calm. She said nothing of what was about to come. She simply guided them to the table, letting the meal begin. They spoke of college, of classes, of ordinary things. The house was filled with a warmth that felt almost real, almost like the life Amelia had once believed in. And then, the doorbell rang. Daniel looked up, surprised. Amelia rose slowly, her movements deliberate, and walked to the door. When she opened it, Claire stood there, her children at her side. For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other, one with tired, betrayed eyes, the other with calm resolve. Then Amelia stepped aside and said softly, "Please, come in." Daniel's face drained of color when he saw them. His fork slipped from his hand, clattering against the plate. Ethan looked from his father to the strangers at the door, confusion spreading across his face. Amelia's voice was steady, almost gentle as she spoke. "Daniel, I thought it was time for everyone to meet each other. After all, you've been living two lives. Why not bring them together?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Claire stepped into the room, her children clinging to her hands. Her eyes were filled not with anger at Amelia, but with hurt directed squarely at Daniel. "You told me you were separated," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You said the papers were nearly final." Daniel opened his mouth, but no. Words came. His usual quick lies, his polished excuses. They deserted him now. With both women standing before him, with his son watching, there was no angle left. No story that could bridge the chasm of truth now laid bare. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Dad, what is this?" His tone wasn't angry at first. It was bewildered, almost childlike, as though he were a boy again, trying to make sense of something impossible. Daniel stammered, "Ethan, I can explain." But Amelia cut him off, her tone calm and sharp as glass. "No, Daniel, there's nothing left to explain. We all know now." She reached into the drawer of the sideboard and pulled out a folder, the one she had prepared for this very moment. She placed it on the table and opened it, spreading out the documents, bank statements, photographs, notes, copies of school forms with his name listed as father. Every piece of evidence she had collected laid bare under the light. Daniel's hands shook as he looked at them, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing without words. Claire's expression hardened as she saw proof of what she had been unwilling to believe. Ethan stared, his jaw clenched, the hurt in his eyes deepening with each page he read. Amelia's voice remained steady. "This is the life you've built, Daniel. You thought you could keep us all separate, that you could divide yourself and we'd never see the whole picture. But lies don't last forever. They unravel. And here we are." The room was silent again, except for the quiet sound of Claire's children shifting uncomfortably beside her. Amelia turned to her gently. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this. I know you didn't ask for this any more than I did. But you deserve the truth." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you for showing me. I didn't know." Amelia gave her a small, understanding nod. Then she turned back to Daniel, her expression calm but unyielding. "You've taken enough years from me. Enough lies. Enough time. From this moment on, I won't be a part of your double life. You can face the pieces of it on your own." Daniel reached out, his voice desperate now. "Amelia, please. We can fix this. But Amelia shook her head slowly. "No. You've had years to choose honesty, years to value the family you already had. Instead, you chose lies. This is your consequence, and I won't lift it for you." With that, she stood, her posture steady, her face calm. She turned to her son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, this isn't your burden to carry. You've done nothing wrong. Remember that." Ethan nodded, though his eyes were full of pain. Amelia knew it would take time for him to heal, but at least now he had the truth. Claire gathered her children and looked once more at Daniel, her expression a mix of sorrow and anger. "You lied to me, to them, to everyone. Don't come back to my house. Don't come near my children. We don't want your lies anymore." She left quietly, closing the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house like the final note of a song. Amelia looked at Daniel one last time. He sat slumped at the table, his face hollow, his world collapsing around him. He had no lies left, no mask to wear, no refuge to run to. Both of his carefully built lives had collided, and in the wreckage, he was alone. Amelia spoke softly, almost kindly. "I hope someday you understand what you've done, but whether you do or not is no longer my concern." Then she turned, walked upstairs, and closed the door behind her, leaving him in the silence of his own undoing. For the first time in months, Amelia felt a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not triumph, but release. The weight she had carried, the stone in her chest, it lifted. She had delivered her revenge not with rage, but with truth. Calm, undeniable truth. And that, she knew, was the most perfect payback of all. She lay down that night. She thought of the future. Not of Daniel, not of the years wasted, but of herself. A woman who had been betrayed, who had endured, and who had finally taken back her story. The silence she had carried for so long was gone, replaced with a quiet strength that belonged only to her. And in that strength, Amelia knew she was free. If you enjoyed this calm but powerful revenge story, consider supporting the channel. Please like this video, share it with others who appreciate thoughtful storytelling, and subscribe for more calm revenge stories told with the same steady, human voice.